Well, there's an interesting entryway in the Buddha's teachings, uh, which is psychotherapy as being framed by this Noble Eightfold Path aspect called right effort. And right effort refers to both the general sense of, you know, putting your all into it, or, energy, this kind of thing. The technical, sort of the seed of the technical definition is the effort to abandon the unwholesome and cultivate the wholesome. So out with the bad, in with the good, so that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And but what it's really at essence talking about is, this is the path factor where we dive into the whole of mental culture, the whole of kind of the recrafting of the mind, the recrafting of the heart. That's under right effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so it it just begs comparison with the psychotherapeutic practices that also are aimed at abandoning the unwholesome, like personality patterns, habits, behaviors, and so on that aren't working, and cultivating the wholesome. Let's develop some wholesome ways of looking at things and some good habits, and so on. So where are the commonalities that are really valuable, and what can we learn from the differences, that would inform in, sort of like provide a uh, early Buddhist perspective, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
on,
Mm-hmm.
on psychotherapy, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
And
oriented toward the sense of recrafting the mind and the heart.
mhm, right. So first of all, both perspectives recognize human suffering
Mm-hmm.
and are aimed at mitigating suffering. But what we mean by suffering might not be the same. Uh, there's the, kind of, I guess if Freud is famous for talking about the normal suffering, and we're going to get rid of the extraordinary, maybe the psychotic suffering, but we're not going to do anything about the normal suffering. Um, but when you look at the Buddhist perspective on that normal suffering, or what he called, in the language of the time, dukkha, this kind of ongoing thread of dissatisfaction, uh, it gets back to this, the mind, the heart, the body always going for more, always being this appetitive, like we said, always trying to feed itself with either sensory inputs, intellectual inputs that keep us stimulated, um, uh, inputs that inflate or stabilize the self, those kinds of inputs. Hunger, feed me more, look at me, admire me, appreciate me, validate me, those kinds of, always hungry for more. Or don't look at me, I'm now hungry to get away. I'm hungry in the sense of uh, fearing being
Mm-hmm.
seen, fearing the intimacy, and that's, so my hunger is to be invisible in that case. But either way, I'm never satisfied with it because I'm never safe enough. So the sense of being in the world, always on edge, always contingent, always wanting more or wanting less, always fearing in some sense for my survival or my happiness or my whatever. So that kind of level of dukkha that recognizes that it's happening moment by moment through the sense doors in the mind, to always, always off. That's dukkha, right? That's the
Right,
suffering.
right, 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 right.
And so when we talk about uh, in the language of the Buddha, we're talking about cessation of that whole mass of suffering. And there's it's very tempting to say, because we have this appreciation for just the complexity of the mind and the needs of the body, to say it's not possible. That kind of freedom is not possible. So there's some fundamental problems that come from that. But before I talk about those, I have to. So that's kind of what I call the psychological bypass. Freedom, in that sense, is not possible.
Right.
And so, because freedom will mean necessarily giving up my precious sense of self and all of my, my personality formations, all of my romantic associations, all of my sense of becoming, is like, rather than being something that I'm going to coddle and get right, it's going to be something I'm talking about really releasing.
Yeah.
Right. And so the psychological bypass is to say, no, that's not possible.
I want to
Right.
check with you just a little something as you're talking.
Sure.
You're very vividly capturing a sense of the hunger for more,
Right.
or the hunger for disappearing and hiding,
Right.
as essentially strategies to regulate interaction. That there is a sense of that challenge, that existential challenge of we do not exist in and of ourselves, we exist in interaction, and interaction presents problems that feel overwhelming. And so through the pressures, we evolve some strategies which are going to involve either grasping or hiding. And since they are essentially strategies that are born from pressure and are essentially faulty, they're condemned to never work and to have that sense of emptiness, unless the underlying problem of how to deal with interaction and what is the self in interaction is actually dealt with.
That captures that aspect of it that assumes that the self is going to at some point be able to get the right mix of strategies. And one of the core sort of tenets, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
is the Buddha's observation that there is no lasting self. It's
Right.
all impermanent. It's all contingent. It's all constantly being fabricated and refabricated.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's always going to be uneasy. It's never going to get everything the way it wants because it itself is empty. And so, how can you stabilize something that is contingent and empty?
Right.
Right.
It has an emerging quality. It's
And
something that happens in interaction. It's an experience that we have in interaction.
and
And
can
we're handling it as if it were something that has an existence of itself.
exactly. And therefore, it can never be stabilized. It's just because it's unstable. It's intrinsically a changing, fabricated process. So it's always going to be unstable. And that's a fundamental human dilemma, right? So when that's understood, we make this by both the psychotherapeutic outlook that, a psychotherapeutic outlook and the Buddhist teachings come into alignment because they both see that. But if you don't see that, then the psychotherapeutic outlook that is going to try and provide all the strategies for this self to get happy is going to be out of alignment with this outlook that says a genuine freedom is possible, but it's not the freedom of that self.
Right.
Okay. So here's the thing, though. what happens is when people come to a path like Buddhism, they find meditation, and they find meditation not as a way of seeing clearly and you might say turning towards these human vulnerabilities and challenges, but as a way of bypassing them, a way of like finding a kind of uh, coping by way of silencing and suppressing the fears of the self and the desires and all this kind of thing. And that's called a spiritual bypass,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you know, meditation becomes a narcotic, basically, right? That's a spiritual bypass. So on the one hand, you have a spiritual bypass that denies your humanity and your the kind of the painful nature of things and so on. And then on the other hand, you have the spiritual bypass, the psychological bypass that bypasses the possibility of letting go of all that, that denies the possibility of freedom. So, in between what I call these double bypasses,
Right.
right? You have the possibility of coming into the actuality of the human experience, the human dilemma, and knowing that through, if I may, through a whole life path that skillfully recognizes this situation, one can begin to um, sort of dissolve or erode all of the constructs that hold in place this scared, hungry self construct, this way of life that is always trying to find stability with anything from successes or drugs or sex or whatever it is doing to stabilize the self, or intellectual you know edifices of some sort. So that can be released, and there can be a recognition of the personality and all of its stuff without holding on to it. And now there can be a genuine effacement, a genuine diminishing, dissolving of the root of the suffering,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And but a whole life path is, I come back to that because the self is going to be constantly, trying to reform as best it can, because that's what it knows how to do. It's survival. It's a mortal fear,
Yeah.
losing
Yeah. Yeah.
losing myself. It's a mortal fear.
Yeah.
And so um, better to really have these practices, like the practice of, and I'll use some Buddhist language if you don't mind, right view.
Mm-hmm.
Is basically saying cultivate wise understanding, cultivate wisdom, and here's the things you do. You can have good conversations, you can study, you can meditate, you can have friendships that bring in what is needed because you are not going to have everything. So there's actual strategies for cultivating a harmonious perspective, strategies for cultivating a wise aim called right intention. How do you develop right intention? Well, gosh, we can see the value of intelligent religion because they have like things like this that are just reminders for wholesome qualities. Well, that's a practice of right intention that you're looking at. It says, oh, remember what peacefulness is? Do you want to aim that way? Or the right intention of compassion?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What reminds you, what aims your mind towards right intention? And these are life practices, right? So, and on with
So
mindfulness.
there's a logic there, in a sense that if we don't take the self as something that has an independent existence, and that think of it as something that is emerging from interaction,
Mhm.
then by taking the advice that says, here, try this on, do this practice, do that practice, then we give ourselves a chance to see the nature of that interaction and to discover the sense of self that emerges from that.
Right. Which, of course, requires, while I'm engaged with you, enough mindfulness to observe internally, to observe externally, to observe both internally and externally between us, the relational space and kind of the whole. So there's a perspective that comes with uh, this cultivation of mindfulness in the very situation where I most often forget, which is with another person,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
That's where insight dialogue, this relational meditation practice I developed and teach, comes in. You're actually bringing that quality of remembering awareness, remembering the body, remembering these wisdom perspectives or what have you, while engaged. And as you're saying just now, you can see these processes at work, especially as the mind begins to leave those pauses, calm down, and you know uh, remember the wholesome perspective that's
So
available.
I want to jump on the word remember, because you made the point in your book about mindfulness, sati, and the
Yeah.
root of remembering. And so that has a different take on the meaning of mindfulness.
Yes, it does. It does. um
And the sense of remembering in a sense of paying attention to, not like remembering a long forgotten thing, but
well done, I'm glad you caught that. Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. That's correct. So the way that you would be, let's say, um, you know, let's say you're a little kid and your mom's taking you to grandma's house and says, now remember, grandma can't hear too well. Now, she's not saying, you know, remember it in the sense of just like, you may have forgotten that, but no, while you're with grandma, hold that in mind. So that's what that kind of remember is, the maintaining in the mind. So mindfulness practices that invite you, for example, to remember, to be aware of the body, even as you're engaged with another person or while you're observing the breath or whatever it is, that's a remembering of the body or of the breath. But just as well, I could be remembering, for example, the nature of clinging, which we talked about earlier, right? So I could just be, here we are talking, and I pause and, do am I wanting anything from this? Am I trying, am I holding on to my self image here? Am I trying to build something up and hold on to it? It's like, that's a mindfulness that is both present centered and has this wisdom element
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
in this moment. It's not like I'm just thinking about clinging. I'm observing present moment experience through that lens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very powerful.
And there is a built-in quality of connection with something outside,
That's
because it's also remembering that thought that was introduced by the person outside, by the Buddhist teachings,
yeah,
and bringing it in, and therefore in that moment seeing things from that outside perspective as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you can see how something like that opens up this vast space for a whole life path type of practice.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can be remembering in that sense or mindful in that sense. You're cooking a meal. Of course, you can be mindful of cutting and of washing, and that's beautiful, great. But you can also keep in mind, be mindful of, let's say, loving kindness and generosity. It's like just be reflecting on the the meal that I'm making. Is like, oh, I'm going to serve this to other people, and how lovely the giving is, and how the food came from somewhere. And it's not just an intellectual game. You're not just entertaining yourself. You're
Mm-hmm.
actually conditioning, getting back to this right effort to cultivate the wholesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So,
But so what it does is almost visually implies the experiencing being part of something larger, because
absolutely.
that remembering is connecting to that other voice and other perspective,
Uh-huh.
and being able to be more than the default mode, but be influenced by that other perspective into seeing in a larger way.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well put. Well put. So, how great that you could have a life that has those kinds of references rather
Yeah.
than be washed everywhere that, like, oh, now it's, this crazy politician, or now it's this entertainer, or now it's this product that they want to sell me, or now it's this disaster. I mean, there's a possibility of a life that, you know, is centered in some kind of, a collection of wholesome values, qualities, and intentions.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah. And centered not through authority that leads you by the nose, but through the dialogue with
Mhm.
that other experience.
Right. Well put. Right. Yeah, you're having roots in experience. Um, Sometimes you come to the edge of your experience, and still life is calling for more. You know, and maybe there's like, oh, you know, I I don't know how to handle this one. Like a significant other just, I'm in the hospital and they're maybe dying right now. Like that's has happened to me. I lost a daughter. I have a son that at the age of 25 got stage 4 cancer, and he made it through. But there was a moment there where, not just a moment, there was a period of time where we might lose him. And so what does life offer then? Where's the reference that you're talking about, this greater reference that is, um, not just being brought in while you're cutting carrots, but it's being brought in while your son is maybe about to die, you know? And so you might come to a place where, ah, I have faith in the power of staying in this moment and not falling out to past or future, because when I do, I know that's where the terror is. That's where the most pain is. And I'm useless to the world when I'm in that kind of pain. And obviously, and it just hurts.
So I want to stay a little longer with that phrase. I have faith with the power of staying in the moment, because the word I have faith is often used in a sense of blind faith,
Right.
almost that what defines the quality of my faith is the more absurd it is, the more merit I have to have faith.
Well,
And quite obviously, you're talking about a faith that is born of repeated experience. We were talking before about the value of the practice as something that prepares you for more intense situation. So in this sense, it is a faith in yourself and in the experience that you have acquired in testing that recipe.
right. But what I'm trying to point out at the same time, which is to say, not instead of, but in addition to what you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
is that there are times, sometimes little, sometimes enormous, where you come to an edge where you don't have the experience,
Yes.
right? And there, the faith, if you will, is built on what's come before, but it doesn't go here. It doesn't know this yet.
Yes.
But you're still going to trust it because
Yes.
of where you've been so far. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Right.
So yes, it's not that you know that experience, but you know that in other difficult experience, it served you better. to
Right.
stay in a moment than not.
Right.
So you
Right.
don't know for sure that it will work this time, but given past experience, it might make sense to try it.
I'm going for it.
Yeah.
And, in part, I don't have a choice. And it's either that or terror, you know, or uh, some other kind of method of deadening my mind or trying to control the situation, which of course is impossible, but I'll fight with it to get control. And then, of course, all the unskillful actions that can come from that. Uh,
Mhm.
you see people acting crazy in hospitals and stuff all the time because they're past their edge and they don't have a reference. They don't have the awareness. They don't have the self-awareness. They don't have a way of coping. And so they get angry at the nurse and they get angry at the doctor, or they get completely bereft, and it just spirals into an insanity, into like getting completely untethered, which is understandable. My heart breaks at the thought of it. Um, and I have seen people that I love in such extreme, states, and it's very painful. It's very sad, but it's not our only choice.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very painful. It's very sad, but it's not our only choice.
hmm hmm Yeah. So all of this stemming from, beginning with a, exploration of, you know, psychotherapy, psychotherapy as a mode of dealing with human suffering, and kind of the Buddhist path perspective of dealing with human suffering. And look where we are. We're kind of at like, oh, this is where the rubber hits the road, isn't it?
Yes, 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 it is.